it's okay to really not know the direction you're headed, because eventually, no matter which path you choose, you can never really be wrong in your choice. There's just always a way to make things make sense, kind of as you tell your story towards the end.
Hi again. Today I'm here with Christy Ishii. Christy is running her own coaching business, and she's also the program director for an NPO that we're going to learn a little bit more about. Christy, how are you doing today?
Hey Brian, it's so nice to be back with you, and I am doing great today. It's my first time back to Japan in like 3 years since living here, so really great being back.
Yeah, and so one of the things I wanted to just quickly shout out was that we've actually done an event together in the past, and that was realigning your 2022, which was last year, and that was looking at kind of careers and deciding like how to structure your year to accomplish your goals. And so that was great. So it's awesome to have you back. And so I was hoping maybe you could give us a little bit of your history and your story, and then go over the three things that you've learned kind of in this journey.
For sure. So my journey started, I'm from California, fourth, fifth generation Japanese American, went to school at UCLA and had a bit of an identity crisis there where I wanted to rediscover some of my like ancestral roots in Japan. So came to Japan on the JET program for 2 years in Gunma-ken, and then moved to Tokyo because I wanted to become like some bilingual professional essentially, and found myself in a small boutique recruiting firm, and also continued doing some nonprofit event organizing on the side as well. And during the 2020 like kind of rise of COVID, our company downsized. I was let go, and I went back to the U.S. and I repatriated in June 2020, and that's kind of where my journey started. And this whole what we're talking about today about like an unexpected career change, I went through like 3 phases of shifts during the I guess past 3 years that I've been in the States. And that first part was the self-discovery journey, where I got to relearn and just discover new things that I had kind of forgotten that I loved to do, because I hadn't done that in my previous job. And I also was able to just acknowledge some of the skills that I've developed over the past 4 years living in Japan that I didn't have time to reflect on because I was just like, go, go, go here in Tokyo. And then the third thing was learning how to then sort of rebrand myself and retell that story. And so I want to share some tips that I learned about my journey over the past 3 years. And those are the three main things that I want to talk about today.
That's awesome. I think that sounds really good. And so can you tell me a little bit more about number one?
Sure. The first thing that really helped me make this career shift was really discovering the talents and just things that I like to do. So self-discovery was a really big part of the journey, just to kick it off. And what that looks like is essentially I dove into web designing. I worked on some Canva, like social media campaigns. Some of it was pro bono, some of it I got paid for. And those kind of things helped remind me the stuff that I was like capable of doing on my own without thinking about what I was doing for a company. So just personal skill sets and self-discovery, trying old things that I used to do that I didn't do in my recent last job, and reminding myself like, oh, these are things that I can do. Those really helped.
Interesting. And so were those things that you mentioned maybe you had done before, or things that you were interested in anyway, or how did those come up?
So that one actually, with the web design, I was networking with folks when I came back to the States. It had been 4 years since I had been back, and it was just in catching up with a friend. She had started a business. She had mentioned that she needed a website done just for her LLC to have her name somewhere. And I was like, well, I've made like blogs in the past. And so she essentially commissioned me to build her website. And I was like, sure, I can make it. And she's like, how much do you want to be paid? And I had never, done anything for money, especially web design. And so she just gave me a quote and I said yes. And so that's how the web designing started. And then from there, I just told more people. All of a sudden it was like, well, I can make websites for people, like simple ones like Squarespace or Wix. These aren't like engineering, back end things, just the front end. So that was how that one started. The other one also was a networking thing. I was still working and chatting with people in Japan, and some folks needed some help with social media because of the pandemic shift. Like everyone went online, and folks who hadn't been in that space yet didn't really know the social media, like how to use Canva and like simple things. And so I was able to get opportunities through just simply talking to people about, where I was at in my journey.
Nice. And so would you say these are things that you had planned on doing at some point, or was it just completely new and things that just kind of came up? Or like, how would you, I guess, in a way, how would you designate that exploration maybe for other people? Like, is it just being open to opportunities that come your way, or would it be something a little bit more purposeful and like from the beginning, this is maybe planned?
This was not planned. Again, kind of on the theme of like unexpected shifts. I did not plan on leaving Japan anytime soon. I was like anchored here. I'd been here for 4 years post graduation, and it felt like a really big like uprooting, and I didn't have any idea of what I was going to do back in the States. And so, just by way of networking, just talking to folks, more like reconnecting. That's how these opportunities opened up, and I wasn't looking for doing web design particularly, or designing things on Canva, but it was part of that self-discovery process of like having a conversation. Someone asks you, can you do this? You realize, yes, I can. And it kind of rebuilds that self-confidence in yourself. Excuse me. Like you just kind of recognize the things that kind of go into the point too, like recognize your talents and strengths. And the reason why I say like self-discovery is because in your job, especially like what you do every day, sometimes it's not so versatile. Sometimes you like hone in on sales or marketing or one specific thing, and it doesn't mean you can't do anything else, but what you're required to do for your job is usually streamlined, especially in Japan, right? You have an expertise. And so that self-discovery part was kind of like, I forgot that I enjoyed doing these things. Like I love journaling, I love telling stories, but I hadn't thought about how that would fit into a different type of career. So self-discovery was pretty unplanned, at least for my experience.
That's great. And so to kind of follow that train of thought, when you say self-discovery, it's sort of like, I think you had phrased it like this before, is that it's kind of remembering that you are capable of doing things that were outside of maybe your job scope. Because I do think you're right. I think it is really easy to get stuck in this mentality of all of your value is tied to whatever you're doing for a living. And so what I'm hearing now is that in this process for you, you found that value that you had within yourself, maybe outside of your job description or whatever it was before the shift.
Yeah. I think especially in Japan, like having a label or labeling yourself by like the company or the industry is pretty common, at least in my experience. And a lot of people have assumptions of what it is that you can or cannot do. And I think those assumptions then like jump into our own mindset of how we view ourselves. And so in working with folks and in coaching folks like expats in Japan in particular, I noticed people will say the way they talk about themselves and tell their own story is like, oh, I only have these skills because this is what my job requires. But then the next conversation we have is like, well, what do you love to do? And they talk about all these things that they have so much experience in. And so for me, it was kind of like that. With my job, I was a recruiter in Japan. All I talked about was, the networking part of it, helping people get jobs. But I totally forgot that I was able to make websites in the past, and I am pretty creative on the computer, but none of that was required for the recruitment job. It's like pretty black and white. You're a people person, you talk to folks, make a resume. And so that part of the self-discovery process was fun, yeah.
Nice, yeah. And are there any maybe like recommendations specifically around that exploration or self-acknowledgement or self-realization?
Yeah, self-discovery is a part of just like looking under the hood of like, okay, this is my job title, but that doesn't define everything about me. It doesn't define what I can do in the future. And that's another thing too, like people get kind of like, not stuck, but closed-minded about what it is that they can possibly do, especially here in Japan, because people look at the resume like, oh, you grew this, so you can only do this. And I think that type of outlook on the career is really tough. and it closes a lot of doors. And so doing this or having the opportunity to see self-discovery as a positive thing after an unexpected career shift is not always comfortable for folks, I think. And for me, it was, I felt like I didn't have an option because I came back to the States really quickly after getting laid off here. And so I think for some people, it takes more to kind of go outside the box. But if you are let go, or if you do relocate really quickly, you kind of are faced with that decision right away. There's really no time to wait. And sometimes that can be easier, actually, than stepping away from a job that's comfortable. So it comes in different forms.
Yeah, I like that. I think, so I have two kind of follow-up questions around this. The first is, being a recruiter, did you feel any carryover, or did you feel it gave you any sort of value / perspective when you were moving into maybe this phase of self-discovery?
Like, what did I take from being a recruiter,
Yeah,
and how did that help?
Skills either you learned there. I mean, you mentioned networking in connection to maybe how this came up for you, but then also networking in connection to being a recruiter.
Yeah.
Did you feel like that was a carryover skill and maybe something that would help people in a situation that's kind of parallel, or yeah?
Sure. Yeah, I think being a recruiter naturally gives you access. Well, LinkedIn is very familiar. I think it's so much easier to reach out to folks that you don't know. It's part of our job. So that part I know is a stepping stone for some folks. But truly, it's just, I think, a tip for folks who are wondering how am I gonna network? My LinkedIn network is like 300 people, or like maybe they hardly use it. And I think folks don't touch LinkedIn unless they're job hunting, or a lot of folks don't. Whereas like if you're a recruiter, you're on it like 24/7. And so that's what I was used to. So it wasn't odd for me. But if it's somebody who's not a recruiter, just going in with this mindset that not everyone's gonna respond, but if you kind of utilize your alumni networks, say one sentence that connects you to that person, whether that's a school, an organization, or some event that you went to, especially virtual events. Nowadays, I guess you can meet people in person still. But for the virtual events, especially if you're internationally traveling or working, you can attend an event and see who's in the participant list, or see who's commenting, or at least see the name of the person who's speaking. And sometimes when they ask a question, or if you just recognize their name from some other like company website or something, and you realize you do want to talk to them, you can send them the personalized note if they're within 3 degrees of your network. And you can say, hey, I saw you at this event. I loved what you had to say. Can we talk more about this? And so there are very simple ways to reach out to folks, and just kind of have to bite the bullet, hit send, and just see who responds, but not take it personally, because it's very impersonal. It's not about whether they like you or not, or whether they want to talk to you. Sometimes it's just about if they see the notification and if they use LinkedIn, but it's totally worth using to network for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think I think being a recruiter, one of the basic skills that I think you really learn or gets kind of entangled in your life is that cold outreach, just being able to say hello to like anyone, and like you said, it's not personal almost. And of course, you want to speak to them, and it's great if they respond, but not taking it as like a personal rejection if they don't respond.
And I think a good reminder too that folks would remind me of is folks do want to help you. Like if you have a question, if you want to reach out to somebody, whether or not they're an alumni, most people, like more often than not, people want to help somebody who's in a career shift or wants to learn more about what they do. But I think the mindset is often, oh, I don't want to bother this person. I don't want to take their time. I'm a stranger. Why would they want to talk to me? But the truth couldn't be farther from that. So just reframing the way people look at cold outreach, I think, is really important.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I think that's awesome. And then as far as my second follow-up to this first point of self-discovery is if you could, so that's like maybe one big takeaway is like, don't be afraid to reach out to people. Maybe networking is maybe the core of this self-discovery, is being able to talk to people and just being open to whatever comes of that. Are there any other things that you would want to give people who are maybe facing a similar situation?
Sure. I think another thing outside of reaching. So networking, the reason why that's a thing is that people serve as mirrors for you essentially, and they can open up opportunities or give you perspectives that you wouldn't have seen yourself. So it's more of a internal thing. Like the reason for networking is not really to expand your network, it's to really see what people reflect back to you. But the other part of self-discovery, that a tip that could be helpful for some people, is just thinking back to, what you did maybe back in school and university, or even before your previous job. It doesn't have to have been a full-time job. It could have been a part-time thing. It could have been your side gig, a side business that you were running. Just go back to something that you remember really enjoying. And even if it doesn't sound like it's a professional route, if it doesn't, or if people have told you in the past, this is not going to, make you a solid career financially, reach back into the past of like what you enjoyed doing. And I think that will really help folks who are trying to, how do you say, like reclaim that energy or reclaim something that they were really passionate about. Because sometimes when there's a big career shift, there's less confidence in our skill sets. We get a little bit insecure about what it is we can or can't do. But if you go back to something you love to do, it comes more easily, it comes more naturally, and it's just a good segue into then trying some new things a little bit outside your comfort zone. So start from something that you enjoy, something that you're good at, and that like there's no pressure whether you kind of pass or fail at that. It's just for yourself. So that's helpful, yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I totally agree. I think I think that so much of building a career for me has been accumulating all of these seemingly random skills, and then suddenly realizing that, I can leverage these in ways that are actually helpful to building my career in a direction that I didn't even realize that was possible. And so I do think that being open to trying whatever comes your way and kind of doing your best to see if this is something you're interested in, if it is something that you want to get better at. I think that's a great perspective to have at any point in your career, and I definitely think in the position that you're in at that time, it's vital. Any last thoughts around self-discovery, or do you want to move on to point number 2?
That was, just what you said kind of reminds me of just my personal journey too, is like stringing things together, depending on where you are at your career, like if you're a recent grad, or if you had your first job and you're transitioning into a second one, or, you've been doing something for 20 years. Either way, being able to piece your story together is sometimes harder to do, and without being able to self-reflect on what you've done in the past and how that's tied to where you are now. And so for me, my dots did not connect until this recent job that actually I applied for about a half a year ago. And I'm currently working at a nonprofit in Silicon Valley, doing inbound programs for folks who want to use design thinking for either their life or their career, or a nonprofit or a business that they want to create, but they just have a seedling of an idea. And so it's a social innovation 10-day program. And I get to be the designer of that, the program director, and it's like work from home, but I do this program in person twice a year in San Francisco. And the past jobs that I've had are like a perfect alignment for this role. Like the English teaching, did the JET program for 2 years, 2 years recruitment in Japan at a small boutique firm, did a lot of nonprofit organizing and community building events, both in like LA and in Tokyo for several years, then dove into the coaching business, started that on my own. And so entrepreneurship, teaching, and recruitment all really helped me in this job that I have right now and the organizing events. And I could not have told you that this is going to be the job that I was looking for post 2020, but it was a perfect match. And I think if people knew already that like everything would work out, it'd be a lot easier to go through the process. But we don't know all the time like how things are going to end up. So I just want to let people know too that like trust the process. It's okay to really not know the direction you're headed, because eventually, no matter which path you choose, you can never really be wrong in your choice. There's just always a way to make things make sense, kind of as you tell your story towards the end. We'll probably get to that.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
I think that's like a good teaser for what's upcoming. And so, yeah, moving on to number 2, which we had talked about previously, is recognizing your skills and talents. You had alluded to it. And so, yeah, what was your experience in recognizing those skills and talents that maybe you hadn't recognized before?
Yeah, that's a harder topic, because like when I was growing up, a lot of times there wasn't that like self-recognition, talking about yourself in a positive way, or just even talking about your strengths. And I grew up in like a Japanese American household, and so even though it was pretty far removed from Japan, there were still some very like strong there were some strong like cultural roots of like, don't talk so highly about yourself, stay humble, like don't rock the boat, just be quiet. And so recognizing and acknowledging strengths and what you're good at can sometimes be difficult in itself. Some people hesitate to do that because they feel like culturally it's not okay. And I feel like in Japan too, you don't often hear people talk about how great they are at their job or the numbers they hit, maybe in recruitment companies, but typically not really. And so part of this second, like recognizing and acknowledging your talents, it really helps you when you're talking to folks about what you want to do, because it gives you a sense of like assurance and self-confidence that otherwise wouldn't be there. And if you're not confident in yourself, no one else is really going to be confident in hiring you or working with you. And so recognizing what you're good at and then acknowledging that you're good at those things, I think are 2 separate things. So it's like awareness, but then also accepting that like, yeah, like I'm great at this, and like being confident enough to tell somebody like in an interview that I can do the job. I think those 2 things they came after the self-discovery. It was kind of like a process, but that's the second part of that.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think if you could talk maybe a little bit, for me, what's really emblematic about this second step is having the confidence to start your own business, which is something that you've done. And so maybe if you can talk a little bit about how you came about and how you found that confidence to even decide like, this is the route I'm going. Like, I think just being able to say like, people should pay me for this is like, great. Yeah.
That was an organic process. Some people, how they approach going into coaching, sometimes they'll take a certification and decide during that process, I'm a coach. For me, it was like through the recruiting, through teaching, I was always really curious to hear about people's stories. And my old boss, folks would kind of like judge me for talking so long to candidates, because you only have so much time. I would spend like 45 minutes to an hour talking to folks because I really wanted to know their journey and their story so I could give them, an introduction to a company that I thought was a really good fit. But as you know, and like most folks, if you're a recruiter watching, like that's really not how it goes. You really should talk to someone maybe 10, 15 minutes, source it out and see,
Just want to be clear that while in case we do encourage people to talk to candidates or people who are looking for jobs a bit longer.
That is true, yes.
Yeah.
Well,
But I think the industry as a whole can be very transactional. Yeah. And that's something that we really try to avoid here. And so I
love Wall-and-Case. Sorry, I'm talking about.
That's why you're doing this interview with us. Yeah.
But talking about the like industry in general, like the type of recruiter that I was, I think it was not super supported, and so I always wanted to continue that part of the recruiting job. And so that part was always there. I was wanting to hear people's story and help them stitch it together. But when I was back in the States, I had been home for about half a year, and one friend of mine was creating a business with her friend, and she asked me, hey, can you join our meeting and take some notes for us while we talk? Because we can't come to a consensus on things. And at the time I was still I was in that self-discovery phase, making websites, doing things on Canva. And I was like, sure, I will pop into this meeting. I'm great at listening to people and like joining ideas together, giving my perspective. And she was telling me, okay, I'm going to pay you for this. And I was like, oh, okay. You get paid for taking notes. Like that's how that's how little I valued being that third person in the room or being the person to bring ideas together and essentially being a coach. It was like being a business coach. And that was before I had gone into the coaching certification, but that was my first experience, like really recognizing, not yet acknowledging, but recognizing that I had this talent to listen and intentionally like help people also process their own thoughts and bring them together. And then a little after that, somebody had reached out from, again, I joined this thing called Toastmasters in the States. I was just trying to network and use my Japanese. It was like a Japanese English Toastmasters in Silicon Valley, online, virtual, never met these people in person. But somebody in that group was changing jobs. It was like a Japanese expat in the States. And he reached out and he knew I was a recruiter after having shared my self-intro. And he was asking me for like resume tips, and he was saying, can I, like, how much do you charge? Since you're a recruiter, I imagine you charge for these things. And I was like, wow, okay. Like, I never charged anyone for a resume when I was a recruiter. I thought that was part of the job. But I do know people charge for those things. So I was looking up online, how much do people charge? It's like, that's expensive, like 3 to 4 to 500, depending on if it's tech or whatnot. And I just set a price and worked on the resume, and that kind of led to some other sessions. And so that was my first experience doing sort of more like recruitment, career coaching. And then the third one was some friends were reaching out, or friends of friends were reaching out, and they had just been laid off or they were being relocated because of the pandemic. And when they would share their story about, they were asking for career advice, but I think what they really needed was someone to hear and listen to them talk about just the process. And it would lead to some emotions coming out. And I felt really glad that I could be there for them to listen, but I didn't know how to support people emotionally after sharing something so personal like that. And I didn't want to leave people like in a sad state of being, like with tears, with tissues, and be like, okay, it was nice to meet you, but like, I'm sorry, I can't really, this is kind of like the end of the conversation. And I felt like I could do more. And so I knew I was like good at, to a certain extent, of doing coaching. But that's when I realized I want to take it a step further. And so I sought out a specific coaching program in Santa Monica that was psychotherapy based, and it really helped people on like 5 different levels of emotional consciousness to rewire and like push through certain mindset blocks to like help yourself more sustainably go through the challenges that you face. And that was a big shift in deciding, like, I think when I acknowledged that I'm good at the coaching was when I was able to like hit the go on launching a business. But that's a longer process. But essentially, I think that's high level how it got into coaching.
That's awesome. Yeah, and so I think that process is vital for everyone to sort of figure out what they're even like what they would want to be spending their time doing. And I think it is something that from a recruitment perspective for us, that's like one of the first conversations we have to have with people when we're working with people who are looking for jobs is what are you excited about? Like, what are the things that you feel you would want to be doing for 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, whatever that is. And sorry, you can.
Yeah, no, on that point, I think it is hard to like give yourself, unless you have space and time, like if you are laid off, or if you have to relocate, you're forced to have that time with yourself. But for others, sometimes when I ask that question, like people draw a blank, and it's because like they haven't given themselves permission to just really be themselves and give themselves time to do the thing that they love, because they don't feel like maybe it's not worth the time. They don't have extra time. They don't want to make time for that. It's just not directly involved in what they're doing. So it's irrelevant. And so it's hard sometimes for people to even remember what that was. So that's why somehow creating space between what you're doing now and what, like giving yourself a vacation, whether that's like a 1-day self-retreat or whatever you can do just to create some space for you to think about that, I think is really helpful.
Nice, I agree. And so are there any other, I am interested in hearing more on kind of your journey with coaching. And so if you want to expand there, or if you want to go into maybe takeaways, like things that people can do to kind of recognize and then acknowledge those skills and talents, either direction.
Doing the coaching and starting a certification, what happens is you have to have paid hours while you're training. And so that was like a really quick turnaround process. I would learn a module. We had about like 30 modules for like 6 months. So it felt like grad school in a way. I would learn something. It was a pretty deep questioning of like yourself, and there are certain steps you have to take to get to answers. And then the next week I'd have a client session, and they're paying me for running that thing that I learned last week. And so that integration period was really quick. So that process, being a coach, like a new coach, was exciting, but also I had like in the first 6 months, I really had nothing to lose because I was like, this is my first time doing it. It's gonna get better. What's funny though is that when I had done coaching for about a year, then I would kind of look back on what I had done before, and I think I had more pressure on myself to do things a certain way or the right way because I had some experience. So there's like a sweet honeymoon phase, I think, when you start a business where you know nothing about the direction of how it's going to go. You're not really sure, especially for me, I was working with folks in Japan, but I wasn't physically there. And so I wasn't sure how this was going to go. But it was really fun because there were no boundaries, there were no expectations. And so I think just keeping that mindset though, that entrepreneurial mindset of like, there are no expectations. Everything's an iteration, trial and error. If you can keep that mindset the whole way, that's a lot easier. But once you start to grow, you have to create systems, right, for things to work out. And so sometimes it's easy to lose that initial like honeymoon phase of anything goes. But that definitely was part of the process for me with the coaching business. Yeah.
Nice. And so the takeaway from that would be like kind of trying to maintain that level of commitment through whatever ups and downs happen, or what would you say maybe is like the best way to frame it?
The takeaway from that is just like kind of don't be afraid of what is possible, because in that conversation too, a lot of people say like, oh, what are you afraid of if you actually do get 10 clients, like your target? Then my answer in particular was like, well, I don't know. What if I can't support all 10 people at the same time? Like, what if that's too much? Or what if everyone says yes to my coaching? There's this odd fear of like being successful that becomes a mindset block for people as well. So although most people think, oh, I'm afraid of not getting clients, that is true. But a lot of times it's the fear of success that stops people. And so that's another conversation. But
I do think that's a great point, just because I think it's almost easier to fail, right? Where you're just like, it's easier to like not really try, I guess, is maybe fail is even strong. Because like you said, if it's like, you don't get 10 clients, nothing happens, like nothing changes, there's no change.
There's that too, like responsibility too, to like acknowledge like, yeah, I'm a coach, and then also take responsibility for your clients. And for some folks, I think in my experience, for me, that was daunting, because like, oh wow, this is real. But if you fail, you're just still where you were before. So I think, yeah, for me, that takeaway was really, really big.
Nice. And so being able to be comfortable with success maybe is like a mindset that you would want people to extract from that.
So being able to visualize your own success is incredibly important for career changes, interviewing processes, networking, because if you cannot see like what it looks like and what it feels like for you to be successful, then when you do get there, people often do not recognize like, wow, like I reached my goal, and they kind of just keep pushing forward. And there's this trend of just needing to progress, and it leads to like it's called a nourishment barrier. And essentially, if you never acknowledge or self-acknowledge the things that you've done, it's this kind of horse chasing the carrot scenario where you're never satisfied. So yes, recognizing your own success and acknowledging that is a huge part of what can help people in the job hunt or in a big career shift that's like unexpected.
That's great. And so that's maybe like the first one, or at least a question that would be associated with this second thing, which is recognizing, acknowledging, would be, what does success look like to you? And being able to be comfortable with that level of success. And so are there any other questions that you feel like people should have in mind when they're kind of looking at their skills, their talents, and then potentially that success?
So when it comes to like the word success, like a lot of people think financial success, but get creative with that definition. Success can be, like having a full-time remote job, depending on what's important to you. And I think we didn't talk about it too much, but like the values, the things that you do value in your life or in your career come into play when it comes to success. Because if you value freedom, you value your time, your schedule. In my case, when I was applying for this last job that I got, freedom of schedule was one of my top priorities, and autonomy over what I was doing was another thing. And in this current position as program director, I get to create the entire program from scratch, and who's speaking, and I select the participants. Like everything is actually my responsibility. And I also get to create my own schedule, which as a recruiter was really nice. And so I really liked that, and I didn't want to change that. I wanted to be able to work and do some coaching on the side, not have like a 9 to 5, like check in, check out type of scenario. And because I knew that those things were things that I valued and I didn't want to let go of, that really helped me define whether or not I was successful. Because to me, that's successful. And it's also like where I guess what you call like have my happiness come from. Like if I have those things, I'm pretty happy. And I think there's some type of correlation between like how you view your own success and your level of happiness, just on paper. Like I think that's really helpful to have.
Nice, yeah. And so I think before, when we had talked about this, I really like the way you had framed it, and it's like conversations that maybe people are not having with themselves about what they value in work. Yeah, and so I think having that perspective of what is important to you beyond, like if it is financial success, like that's fine, like just say that, like like be comfortable saying like, okay, this is what's really important to me. I think that if I remember correctly, I could get this wrong, but I think there are there's like 3 or 4 things that are really motivating for people, and I think it's like autonomy, like you mentioned. I think it's like impact, right? Like on the direction of whatever you're working on, and then recognition. I think financial stability is there, but I think it's actually more of like an underlying thing. It's not directly motivating. So I think, yeah, defining like what those look like for you, like what is autonomy in your mind? Like, is that complete like separation from anyone or for any oversight, or is that just like being able to decide your schedule? Impact, which would be like being able to see what you're working towards, and being able to see your direct contributions with whatever you're working on. And then recognition is just being able to say like, I feel that my work is appreciated, or that I feel like I'm at least respected in where I'm working, or whatever that looks like, again, for each individual. And so I think that those things are really important to define for each person. And here at One Case, that's definitely one of the things that we talk about, is like, how do we help people maybe recognize those in what they're doing, and then in the next step, whatever they want to do, like how can we carry those over or build those up?
Yeah, and I think too, another reminder for creating those definitions for yourself is that they change. The values can change. If you have family, it might change. Like what your priorities are will change for sure. So acknowledging that your values are going to change over time is something to keep in mind. But then also creating this definition of success and your kind of parameters for enjoying your job takes time. Like it does not happen overnight. And I think a lot of people have pressure, especially when they graduate or after their first job. There's this expectation that you should know what you want. And for me, I think I had 1, 2, 3, at least, 3 jobs before I really understood. And also, in addition to like the newer way of like virtual working styles and things like that too, like encompassing all of that, it took years for me to be able to confidently say, this is exactly what I'm looking for. And so if anyone feels that they don't have an answer and they're putting pressure on themselves to come up with an answer, I would say just hold the phone. Like, it doesn't need to have an answer right away, and just test it out, right? Like, each job that you have is another reminder or just a comparison for something that you've done in the past, and then you get to gauge where you're at in your life now and pair up, what works for me today. Maybe what worked for me 2 years ago, right when I graduated, does not work for me now, or now that I have kids, what worked for me before does not work for me anymore, or things like that. Life changes. So I think those two things are also good to think about when defining what success looks like for you.
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective to have. And I think that even comes from like that ability to say, like, am I really embodying what my success looks like? Like, right. Even like just being able to kind of look at yourself from maybe an outside perspective or your own objective perspective focused on yourself. But like saying like, okay, like am I working towards whatever I want to be working towards? Like, am I going in the right direction? And being able to say no or yes and course correct or look for opportunities outside of maybe what you're working on at the time.
Yeah, and I think like for like Wall and Case especially, and like with anyone in the coaching industry, I feel like Wall and Case recruiters are essentially like your part-time coaches, because when you get to work with somebody who is looking for a job, like having that reflection comes from your recruiter. And so I think Wall and Case has always been my favorite recruiting company, and it's just like because I think my values match a lot with this organization, because it's a human-centered job. Recruitment is not a one-way street. It's like, how do you get to know somebody, build a relationship so that you can help them reflect on what they're looking for. So essentially, I think recruiters here do a really good job at mirroring and coaching for folks going through the career search. And if you have a chance to work with a Wall and Case recruiter, it's definitely, it's a it'll have a huge impact on the way that you're able to pivot in a career change, but then also it will help you long term figure out what you do want to do when you're able to work with somebody and not just stay in your own bubble and circle.
Definitely appreciate that. Thank you so much, Chris. I mean, we've been, yeah, it's great every time we get to partner with you on anything, so we appreciate the shout out. Cool, and so I think that sort of brings us to point number 3, or the third thing that maybe helped you in your journey specifically, and that was, well, I'll let you say it actually.
Yeah, so the third thing, so there's self-discovery for the first part. The second phase of my journey was essentially recognizing, acknowledging my strengths and abilities in both my career, but then also just professionally as a working professional, and things I enjoyed. The third thing, though, that's really important, especially if you are pivoting from an unexpected career change, is how you tell your story. At different points of time, too. From if it's a layoff, if it's a relocation, or if it's you chose to leave a toxic work environment, whatever your situation is, as time goes on and like the farther you get from that event, the way you remember that story can change or it'll stay the same. And so when you tell your story, initially there might be some emotions that come up. And I know for me, when I first lost you can say you lost your job, or you can say, I could say I chose to go back home. It really depends on how you say it. But in the beginning, to me, it felt like a loss, because I was really, really heartbroken that, my job's tied to my visa. I was living with somebody who was from Japan, and I was really I was pretty set to be here for a while. And so to me, when I told my story in the beginning, I would get pretty emotional if somebody asked me about it. So I purposely did not reach out when I first left Japan. I didn't reach out to anyone right away. I needed some time to myself to just process what was going on. But then as I started to talk to folks, my first thing was, I was let go from my company. And I held on to that story for a very long time. And that can be a little damaging if you carry a lot of your past things with you. And this isn't just for career, this is for like relationships and life. This really just applies to everything. But the reason why I share my story is because when I made that switch and I chose to speak about my past differently, people saw me differently. I was more confident with what I was talking about. I was able to then step out of, I lost my job in Japan during the pandemic narrative. And now my story was, I created a business for expats in Japan because of the things that I was able to learn during my time living in Japan. Very different story. And what you say to other people about yourself is how people remember you, but most importantly, it's how you view yourself. And you start to create this inner dialogue of either something positive, like a positive trajectory story, or something in the past that's like kind of weighing you down and preventing you from moving forward. So storytelling can have huge impacts on your personal self-confidence and also like how people view you.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that to extend to kind of get up to the current point in your story, I think that ties really well into what you're doing now, which you kind of explained before, but I mean, if you want to expand on that maybe a little bit, and how storytelling has really connected to your current role.
Yeah, so right now, the story that I get to share most commonly is when I have people apply for this program that I run as program director. I tell them, I'm running this Exploring Social Innovation program, and I get to tell them the story of how I was an English teacher, then a recruiter, helping people in their careers, and then a coach, and I started my own business. I was an entrepreneur, still am, but was like full-time doing it for 2 years before this position came up. And when I tell that story, it not only makes a lot of sense to the participant applying, they're like, wow, yeah, this makes sense. Everything makes sense about her journey. When I talk to friends and family now, they kind of reflect back to me what I see in myself, which is something that has never happened in my life, which is, wow, this is a great fit for you. And I can like finally say like, yeah, like hell yeah, it is. Like this is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing, because I love every aspect of my job, and it makes me also feel like everything I did in the past had a purpose. And so I get to tell that story right now. And also like I'm here on this trip to Japan, just to full circle it. This is my first time back in 3 years, and so it's a huge moment for me to come back here in a space that I like felt like was my home for 4 years. And I'm coming back as a business owner of an international coaching business and a program director of an NPO program. And I'm hosting my first coaching event in person tonight, actually, in Harajuku. And I can't tell you, like, I'm so excited for that. It's like kind of a dream come true to be able to step into this new like coaching persona that I've developed over time. But I think more or less I've always been a coach. It's just like now I really get to wear it like outside, and people get to see me how I see myself. And that's a huge part of my story. And I hope that this inspires other people too to feel comfortable sharing their story the way that they want to. Because at the end of the day, you're your own storyteller. And I think that's something that you should always remember.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And so I think this storytelling element really ties in with, like, it can really only be the third step, because you need to be able to discover yourself, as you mentioned, and you have to be able to recognize and acknowledge, and then be able to tell that story. And so if you were to give advice to someone maybe who is at this point in their journey and after being laid off or whatever that unexpected career shift is, what are maybe some of the key things that you would want them to know about being able to shape your story or being able to tell your own story?
Yeah, I mean, kind of take it how you are, adjust it to how you're feeling. If you're not ready to step into a new role, that's okay, and you can be super honest about that. I think nowadays I guess today versus 2 years ago, I think people are more comfortable talking about layoffs, or that vocabulary is like, it's not taboo. I don't know exactly how it feels in Japan, but I know like at least virtually and like when I'm in the States, it's such a common narrative now. But what I've realized for myself is that like when I'm seeing so many people post about this on LinkedIn, it's actually kind of like it reinvigorates like that experience that I had. And then people start to compare like packages and severance packages. Like I barely got one. So I'm like, well, what would my life look like if I did get one? And so something to remember and tips for these transition periods is don't compare yourself to other people because their journey is nothing like yours. And it's unfair, I think, to oneself to compare your journey to somebody else's, especially, saying like, oh, this person had it worse than I did, so I should really not be so sad. Like don't do that. Acknowledge how you're feeling. And then from there, when you do start to talk to people about your story and about what you either have been through or where you want to go, you can be, just be honest with where you're at, because people are not there. They're not here to judge us, but a lot of times we can judge ourselves. And so be honest with your story. Don't fabricate it. Just be who you are, where you're at right now. And enjoy the process, because there are very few times in our life where we get to have a complete stop in our career. And it can feel very uncomfortable because we're so used to having this linear path, or we're so used to at least trying to be on a path to something and progressing. But I think shifting that mindset of, okay, this is a period where I get to just be with myself, explore what I like to do in self-discovery, just acknowledge some of the things that I've been able to do up until now. I see this period now, looking back, as like an incredible like life reflection pivot point. And I think if folks looked at, if you have the privilege to look at it that way, if you have great savings, and so you have like a month or 2 months to actually sit with yourself and do self-exploration, or if you're going home and you have a place to live, you don't have to pay rent. That's not the case for everyone, and I acknowledge that. But if it is the case that you're able to have that month or 2 months to yourself, like what a blessing. I think it's a huge opportunity to make sure that you get what you want out of life in your career. And I think it could be life-changing for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective to have. I know that, it can be tough to be positive in those moments. But I do also think that even if you haven't directly experienced that, I think it's a good mindset maybe to maintain whenever you're working. And I think kind of the ending, or the current moment, I don't say ending, it sounds maybe more morose than I would want it to. But yeah, I mean, where you are now in this career journey, in this unexpected sort of shift, you had to face it. You were kind of forced to make this the best of what happened, and I think you've done a great job. But I do also think that people who haven't had to be completely honest with themselves and decide what they want to do, I think it's a good thing to do pretty regularly, probably, and just make sure that you're on a course that you feel comfortable with and that you would feel excited about when you're looking back, maybe in the next 5 years. Like, did you use the 5 years in the way that you felt you'd be proud of, or have you kind of been coasting? Because I think that, especially for newer careers, it's very easy to say, this is it. This is what I'm doing. You know what I mean? Like, this is going to be my career, and this is the job I got, so I guess this is what I'm going to be doing. And I know, especially for me, in my perspective, like I remember when I was working in the States, I was in like a certain industry, a certain section of that industry, and so I thought like this was kind of my limitation. And so being able like to take these 3 steps, to be able to say like, okay, like what do I really want to be doing? What are the things that maybe I would be the most excited about? What would success look like to me? And then being able to say like, okay, this is what I want to do, and being able to tell that story, like this is what I'm working towards. That would have been really valuable to have there. And it's not something that I even recognized or thought was a possibility until I actually came to Japan and was like doing something that I wasn't as passionate about, and then being able to kind of make that shift to something that I was more excited about, that really gave me that ability to say like, okay, like this is what I want to be doing. Like I feel like I'm going in a direction that I can be happy with, that I can be excited about, that I'll be proud of in 5 years or whatever it is. And so, yeah, I think all of those are really great. And I think that your story is like a shining example of the positivity that you can make from these experiences. Obviously, due in no part to a lack of effort. Like I think you really, like it was, I remember because we've been talking, you and I have been friends since kind of throughout this journey. And I think that it's awesome to see you in this space now. But yeah, I do think that it's valuable for everybody.
Yeah, that was a great summary. No, that was like a super, incredible, like kind of stitch of everything that we've talked about. And I appreciate being able to share this like with you. And like you said, it's not really an end. Like for me, it was this huge shift towards like alignment to like myself. And I think for folks too, the past 3 years might have been some form of like readjusting or realigning to things that really light you up or that really give you the freedom to spend time with the people you love. And I think that's great. And not everybody has also had this huge shift, right? So like you said, this is just great to do in your everyday life. Even if you've had the same job over the past 3 years, and even if it's still steady and stable, it doesn't hurt to reflect and just remind yourself like, yeah, like I've come a long way, like I'm growing in where I am, and also just noticing when you're happy and content and just being okay with sitting there for a minute. I think is something that I didn't do before all of these shifts happened, and so feel a lot more like relaxed and happy with where I'm at, and just a lot more gratitude, I think, as well, just because I know these kind of shifts can be like emotionally taxing on folks, and then it sometimes takes a minute to get comfortable in your own skin again. And I think, like I can say more confidently now, you've seen this kind of evolution, I think, of my journey as well. But you can just tell when people are comfortable being themselves, and I think that's like my main message too. Is just I hope that folks can be happy with who they are and enjoy their lives, and hopefully these things will help.
Perfect. Is there anything that you want to talk about or promote, upcoming events, anything that you want to give a shout out to, or / your website? Where can people find you? Connect?
Sure. I think just connecting on LinkedIn or Instagram. My Instagram is Christy Marico. LinkedIn is where I connect with a lot of people internationally. And the two things that I want people to at least know is that I do coaching consultations and like full-on one-on-one programs on a limited basis, and also I'm running a exploring social innovation program in the Silicon Valley, where we invite folks who live in Asia to come to the U.S. and sort of create like it's a good place if you have a business idea or like a nonprofit organization or event that you want to hash out with a bunch of other folks from Asia. And so feel free to connect with me on like LinkedIn if you want to learn more about those opportunities, or just have somebody, give you some like feedback or give you some space to self-reflect on where you're at in your career journey.
Perfect. What's the name of the program that you're running? Do you want to?
I work for the program director for VIA Programs. It's viaprograms.org, and then /ESI is the program that I run. And so people can find information there, or on LinkedIn, they can connect with me and learn more about the program just through conversation. So.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much, Christy, for taking the time to talk to us today, and hopefully we'll have you back on soon.
Awesome. Thank you.